Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive into whistleblowing in India.
Ooh, whistleblowing. That's a juicy topic.
It is. We're going to be looking at what happens when someone sees something wrong, something shady,
Oh,
maybe even illegal, and they decide to speak up.
it's risky business, right?
Oh, totally risky, but essential,
Yeah.
for keeping things honest and transparent,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about things like government corruption or corporate misconduct.
Exactly. And that's where our deep dive begins. We're going to be digging into articles and policy documents to see how India tries to protect those who dare to expose wrongdoing.
So kind of like a legal safety net for these brave souls.
Yeah, you could say that. It's this concept of protected disclosure. It's all about encouraging people to come forward without fear of getting punished or silenced.
Okay, so protected disclosure. I like that. But how does it actually work?
Well, India has this law called the Whistleblowers Protection Act. It was passed back in 2014, and it's specifically designed to safeguard people who report misconduct in government jobs.
Government jobs, specifically. So, like, if I see something shady going on at the Ministry of,
Let's say the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways.
yeah, exactly. What happens then?
Yeah, well, that's where the act kicks in. It covers a whole range of misconduct. Things like corruption, abuse of power, even criminal offenses by government
This
officials.
is pretty serious stuff.
Hmm.
And this act protects me if I report it.
In theory, yes. The act is supposed to guarantee your confidentiality, so no one's supposed to know it was you who blew the whistle. And it prohibits any kind of retaliation against you. So no firing you, no demoting you, no harassing you. There are even penalties for people who try to silence or harm whistleblowers.
Wow, okay, so that sounds pretty comprehensive. But I gotta ask, is it really that simple? Do people actually feel safe reporting these things?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, the answer isn't so straightforward. You see, even with these legal protections, there's still a lot of fear and hesitation.
I can imagine. It takes a lot of guts to stand up to powerful people, especially when your job or even your safety might be on the line.
Exactly. And that's one of the big criticisms of the act. You see, it doesn't allow for anonymous reports.
So you have to give your name.
Yep. If you want to file a complaint, you have to identify yourself, which, understandably makes a lot of people nervous.
I can see why. That's a tough call. You're basically weighing the potential benefits of speaking up against the very real risks you might face.
It's a delicate balance, for sure. And it's not just limited to government jobs either.
Really, so this whole whistleblowing thing extends beyond the public sector.
Absolutely. In fact, the Companies Act of 2013 requires all listed companies in India to establish something called a vigil mechanism.
A vigil mechanism? What in the world is that?
Think of it like a confidential tip line within a company. It's a way for employees and even directors to report any unethical behavior or violations of the company's code of conduct.
So it's like an internal whistleblowing system. Interesting. So India's got these laws in place. But are they actually working? Are whistleblowers truly protected?
Well, that's what we're going to explore further in our deep dive. But to answer your question, it's complicated. The truth is, there are some serious challenges in making these laws work in reality.
Challenges like what? Give me an example.
One major concern is that the central government isn't really enforcing the act as strongly as it could be. There's a lot of talk, but not enough action.
So it's like a paper tiger looks scary, but doesn't have any real teeth.
Kind of. And that raises serious questions about the safety of whistleblowers. If the government isn't taking it seriously, why should anyone else?
Right. And what about the private sector? Does the act apply to them as well?
That's another issue. The act mainly focuses on public servants. There's very limited protection for whistleblowers in private companies. So someone working for, let's say, a big tech company might feel less safe blowing the whistle than someone working in a government office.
That doesn't seem fair. Shouldn't everyone have the right to speak up against wrongdoing without fear of retaliation?
You'd think so, right? But that's the reality of the situation. And then there's the whole cultural aspect of it, In India, there's a deep-seated fear of authority, a reluctance to challenge the status quo.
I can see that. It takes a lot of courage to go against the grain, especially when you're risking so much.
Absolutely. And that's why even with laws in place, a lot of people still hesitate to come forward. They're worried about the consequences. They're worried about being ostracized or labeled as troublemakers.
It's a tough decision for sure, but let's not dwell on the negative. Let's look at some real-world examples of how these policies can work.
Okay, good idea. Let's start with the National Scheduled Castes Finance and Development Corporation, or NSFDC for short.
NSFDC. Okay, tell me more. What do they do and why are we talking about them?
The NSFDC is a government organization that focuses on economic empowerment for scheduled castes, and they've actually got a whistleblower policy right on their website.
A whistleblower policy. Okay, that's interesting. What does it say?
Well, it was just updated on November 7th, 2024, so it's pretty current, and it's all about promoting better corporate governance. They're trying to protect the organization from things like fraud, bribery, corruption, the whole nine yards.
So they're taking this seriously. They're actually encouraging their employees to speak up.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, if you see something wrong, say something. We've got your back.
What kind of things does their policy cover specifically?
Well, it's pretty detailed. They've got different ways for employees and senior management to report things. They guarantee confidentiality, and they even have specific categories for different types of complaints. Everything from breaches of conduct to financial losses.
So they've really thought this through. It sounds like they've got a whole system set up to handle these sensitive reports.
They do, and it's not just about receiving reports either. They also have timelines for investigations and reporting to their audit committee. So there's a process in place to ensure that things are taken seriously and followed up on.
It makes you wonder, did something happen in the past that prompted them to create such a robust policy? Like a major scandal or something?
That's a really good question. And it brings us to a rather somber chapter in India's history with whistleblowers, the story of Sachendra Dubey.
Sachendra Dubey. Okay, I've heard that name before. Remind me who he was.
Sachendra Dubey was an engineer who was working on a massive highway project back in 2002, and he uncovered a lot of corruption and really shoddy work that was putting the entire project at risk, possibly even people's lives.
So he decided to blow the whistle. What did he do?
He wrote a letter directly to the Prime Minister's office detailing all the corruption he had witnessed, but he was scared for his safety, so he requested anonymity.
That's understandable. Did he get the protection he asked for?
Tragically, no. His identity was leaked, and in 2003, he was murdered. His case sent shockwaves throughout India. It was a stark reminder of just how dangerous it can be to be a whistleblower.
That's heartbreaking. He was trying to do the right thing, and it cost him his life.
It did. But his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Satyendra Dubey's case became a turning point in the fight for whistleblower protection in India. It was a major reason why the Whistleblowers Protection Act was finally passed in 2014.
So in a way, his story shows the power of speaking truth to power, even when, it could be dangerous.
Exactly, and his legacy continues to inspire people today. In fact, just recently, a whistleblower officer in India was awarded the prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award. Kind of like the Asian Nobel Prize.
Oh, that's a huge honor. What does that tell us about how whistleblowing is viewed in India today?
It's complicated. On the one hand, this award shows that people recognize and appreciate the important role whistleblowers play in promoting transparency and ethical behavior. But on the other hand, it also highlights the fact that even those who get international recognition often face tremendous challenges within India's system.
Just like taking one step forward and then half a step back.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But change takes time, especially when you're dealing with ingrained cultural norms and power structures.
Okay, so we've talked about the NSFDC, a government organization that's taking whistleblower protection seriously. Are there any private companies doing the same?
Absolutely. Let's take a look at Deloitte, the global consulting firm. They've got some interesting insights on this.
Right, Deloitte. What do they have to say?
Well, they acknowledge that despite the challenges, whistleblowers are often the most valuable source of information about wrongdoing. In fact, they point to a statistic from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners that says over 40% of frauds worldwide are uncovered because of tip-offs.
40%. That's a huge number. It really shows how crucial whistleblowers are.
It does. But Deloitte also expresses concern about the lack of anonymity in the Indian Act. They believe the government needs to do more to truly protect whistleblowers if it's serious about combating fraud and corruption.
So they're echoing what we've heard before. Stronger protection is needed. Are there any real-world examples of companies successfully implementing whistleblower protection?
Let's shift our focus to the Union Bank of India. They've actually published a really detailed whistleblower policy for 2023-24 that's worth looking at.
Okay, Union Bank in India. What's so special about their policy?
Well, for starters, they really emphasize confidentiality. They offer clear protection against retaliation. And they've outlined a very specific process for raising concerns with different channels for employees and senior management to use.
So they're making it as easy and safe as possible for people to report potential wrongdoing.
Exactly. And they're not just paying lip service to it either. The Union Bank of India is committed to fully investigating every complaint and taking appropriate action. They even say they'll file police reports if necessary.
Wow, they're not messing around.
Nope, they're serious about this. And here's the best part. They actually recognize and reward employees who bravely blow the whistle.
That's amazing. They're not just encouraging ethical behavior, they're actually rewarding it.
Exactly. They're trying to create a work culture where doing the right thing is not only expected but also celebrated.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about laws, challenges, a real-life hero story, and some companies that are taking whistleblower protection seriously. What does all this mean for the average person in India?
Well, I think it means that things are changing, maybe slowly, but they are changing. People are becoming more aware of the importance of transparency and accountability, both in government and in business. And while there's still a long way to go, these new policies and the recognition that whistleblowers are receiving show that India is moving in the right direction.
It's a glimmer of hope, wouldn't you say, in a world that often feels pretty dark and cynical.
I think so. It's a reminder that even one person can make a difference, that speaking up for what's right, even when it's hard, can lead to positive change. Think about Satyendra Dubey. His story is tragic, but it's also incredibly inspiring.
It is. It shows that courage can have a ripple effect long after we're gone. So let me ask you this. Can you imagine yourself ever being a whistleblower? What would make you do it, and what would your biggest concerns be?
That's a great question, and one that I think everyone should ask themselves. It's not an easy decision. It takes a lot of courage and conviction. For me, I think knowing that I was preventing harm, that I was doing the right thing, even if it meant personal risk, would be a strong motivator.
I could see that. But I also imagine the fear would be pretty overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. The fear of retaliation, the potential damage to my career and reputation, those are very real concerns.
It's a heavy burden to carry. But I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to raise awareness, to support those who do speak up, to create a culture where whistleblowing isn't seen as an act of betrayal, but as an act of courage and integrity.
I couldn't agree more. It's about creating a world where speaking truth to power is not only accepted, but also encouraged and protected.
I love that. A world where doing the right thing is the norm, not the exception.
Exactly. And that's a world worth fighting for. It's amazing how this idea of whistleblowing, it connects to so many other things, like good governance and ethical behavior.
Totally. It's like it forces us to look in the mirror as a society and ask ourselves some really tough questions.
Like, are we willing to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing? Or do we have the guts to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable?
Exactly. And these aren't just, philosophical questions. This stuff has real-world consequences, especially when you think about things like our financial systems.
Oh, absolutely. Think about banks for a second. They handle our money, our savings, our investments. We need to be able to trust them completely.
Right. And that's why it's so encouraging to see institutions like the Union Bank of India taking this proactive approach to whistleblowing. They're not waiting for a scandal to erupt. They're trying to prevent it altogether.
Exactly. And their whistleblower policy, it's impressive. They've really thought of everything.
Yeah.
Different ways to report guaranteed confidentiality, protection against retaliation. They even offer rewards for those who speak up.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. But I think what really struck me is their commitment to actually investigating these complaints and taking action. It's not just empty words.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about follow-through. Without action, a policy is just a piece of paper. It's meaningless.
Totally agree. And I think that's what builds trust. When employees see that their concerns are being taken seriously, that action is being taken, it creates a safer, more ethical environment for everyone.
Absolutely. It's a win-win. It protects the institution, it safeguards customers, and it contributes to a more stable financial system overall. So what stood out to you the most about the Union Bank policy?
Honestly, the rewards, I thought that was really interesting. It sends a strong message that they value whistleblowers,
Yeah.
that they recognize the risks people take when they speak up.
That's a good point. It acknowledges that whistleblowing can come with a personal cost. Damage to relationships, social stigma, even career setbacks.
Exactly. But I also wonder if rewards alone are enough. I mean, can you really put a price on peace of mind? Or the fear of retaliation?
That's a good question. And it's a tough one to answer. I think it depends on the individual and the situation. But you're right. Rewards might not always be enough to overcome that fear, especially in a culture where speaking up against authority can be frowned upon.
Okay, so we've seen how whistleblowing plays out in the banking sector. What about other industries? Is it just as crucial in, say, healthcare or manufacturing?
Absolutely. Whistleblowing is essential across all industries. Imagine a whistleblower in healthcare, exposing unsafe practices that could put patients at risk.
Or in manufacturing. Imagine someone uncovering a dangerous defect in a product.
Yeah.
The stakes can be incredibly high.
Exactly. And the potential for harm is immense. Can you picture yourself being a whistleblower in a situation like that?
I honestly don't know. It would depend on so many factors.
Mhm.
The severity of the situation, the potential consequences for myself and others, the likelihood of making a difference. It's a heavy responsibility to carry.
It is, but it's also a vital one. Whistleblowers are often the unsung heroes. They see the cracks in the system, the things that are hidden from view.
And by speaking out, they're not just protecting themselves, they're protecting all of us.
Precisely. But we also have to remember that even with the best policies in place, being a whistleblower is never easy.
Yeah, it takes tremendous amount of courage to challenge the status quo, especially when you're going up against powerful people or institutions.
You're putting yourself out there, you're risking your career, your relationships, maybe even your safety.
Which brings us back to the importance of support systems. Whistleblowers need to know they're not alone.
I couldn't agree more. Both formal and informal support are crucial. They need access to legal resources, counseling advocacy groups, a network of allies who can provide guidance and support.
It's about creating a safety net, a community that empowers individuals to speak truth to power without fear of reprisal. So what are your thoughts on the whole anonymity debate, given the risks involved?
That's a tricky one. On the one hand, anonymity could encourage more people to come forward because they wouldn't have to worry about being identified.
Right. But then again, it could make it harder to investigate those claims,
Yeah.
to separate the legitimate concerns from the, let's say, personal vendettas.
Exactly. There's always that risk of false accusations. And there's also the argument that anonymous reports might not be taken as seriously.
It's almost like you're putting your reputation on the line when you attach your name to a report.
Yeah, there's a certain weight that comes with that. So it's a complex issue with valid points on both sides. Finding the right balance, between encouraging whistleblowing and ensuring fairness. It's a challenge.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's your assessment of the 2014 Act? Has it actually made things better for whistleblowers in India?
Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction. But the truth is, its implementation has been uneven. Meaning, there are still concerns about enforcement, the limited scope of protection for those in the private sector, and the persistent fear of retaliation.
So the law exists, but there's still a gap between the law and reality.
Exactly. And bridging that gap, well, it's going to require a multi-pronged approach.
Like what? What needs to happen?
Well, for starters, we need stronger enforcement of the existing laws. Those who retaliate against whistleblowers need to be held accountable. No more slaps on the wrist.
Right. And what about expanding the scope of the Act? To provide better protection for those in the private sector.
Absolutely. That's crucial. Right now, the law is too focused on public servants. We need to create a level playing field where everyone feels safe speaking up, regardless of where they work.
Okay, so stronger enforcement, expanded protection. What else?
I think we need a massive public awareness campaign. We need to change the narrative around whistleblowing. Instead of seeing them as troublemakers, we need to recognize them as courageous individuals who are essential for accountability and ethical conduct.
It's about changing the culture, right? Shifting the mindset.
Precisely. We need to create a culture where speaking up against wrongdoing is seen as a positive act, a sign of integrity and commitment to ethical values.
And that change, it needs to happen at all levels, within organizations, within society as a whole, even within families and communities.
I agree. We need to encourage open dialogue and support those who choose to speak truth to power, even when it's difficult.
It's about creating a climate of trust and respect, where people feel empowered to speak up without fear of being silenced or ostracized.
Well said. It's a beautiful vision. And while there are undoubtedly challenges, I think we're starting to see some positive signs.
Like what? Give me some hope.
Well, the growing awareness, the development of policies like the ones we've discussed, the recognition of whistleblowers like the Ramon Magsaysay award winner, these are all signs that things are moving in the right direction.
It's like we're on a journey towards a more transparent and accountable society.
Exactly. It might be a slow and bumpy road, but we're making progress.
But it's not just about laws and policies, right?
Right. Laws and policies are important, but they're only part of the solution. We also need to cultivate a culture of ethical conduct where doing the right thing is not just expected, but also valued and rewarded.
So it's a two-pronged approach. We need both the legal framework and the cultural shift.
Absolutely. And that cultural shift, it requires a change in mindset.
Mm.
We need to move away from the perception of whistleblowers as disloyal or troublemakers.
And embrace them as the champions of integrity they truly are.
Beautifully put. It's about recognizing that speaking truth to power, even when it's difficult, is an act of courage and a vital contribution to building a more just and equitable society.
We've talked a lot about the challenges, but I'm feeling a sense of hope emerging. What are your thoughts on the future of whistleblowing in India?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we're at a crossroads. The growing awareness, the development of policies, the recognition of whistleblowers, these are all positive signs, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
So it's a work in progress.
It is, but it's a work worth doing. And
Yeah.
I believe that with continued effort and a collective commitment to transparency and accountability, we can create a world where speaking truth to power is not an act of defiance, but an act of responsibility.
A duty that's both honored and protected.
Exactly. And the story of Satyendra Dubey, it's a reminder of the high cost of silence. But it also underscores the profound impact one voice can have.
His legacy is a call to action for all of us.
It is. It challenges us to ask ourselves, what would we do in a similar situation? Would we have the courage to speak up? What would we need to feel safe and empowered to do so?
You know, it's interesting how we've kind of gone from like this very India-centric view of whistleblowing to this much broader global perspective.
Yeah, isn't it
It
fascinating?
really does highlight how interconnected all these issues are.
I know what you mean. It's like even though the laws might be different and the cultures might be different, from country to country,
Yeah.
the challenges that whistleblowers face, they're remarkably similar.
Yeah, they are. It's like this universal struggle, between
Right.
speaking truth to power and then facing those consequences.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you were talking about these like David and Goliath stories, and it made me think,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever felt like that? Like in your own life?
Yeah.
Where you knew something was wrong? Oh, yeah.
But you felt kind of powerless to actually say something.
I think most of us have probably experienced that in some way or another.
Yeah.
Maybe not on the scale of like exposing massive corruption or something,
Right.
but just that feeling of like, I know something's not right here,
Mm.
but do I say something? Do I not?
And I think that's so relatable.
Yeah.
It's so human,
Yeah.
And it's something that we can all kind of connect to.
Yeah. And it's hard,
It-
even in everyday situations,
Yeah.
to find that courage,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, sometimes
Mhm.
David wins and sometimes Goliath wins.
Yeah, that's true.
But
Yeah.
what matters, I think, is that the fight continues.
Mm-hmm.
That, that the voices of dissent aren't silenced.
Yeah. So for you, what do you think is the biggest obstacle for whistleblowers?
I think it's fear.
Yeah.
The fear of retaliation.
Yeah.
The fear of losing your job, your reputation,
Mm.
your safety even.
Yeah.
It takes incredible courage to overcome that fear. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. And speak truth to power.
It does. And, that's why I
Yeah.
think it's so crucial to have those support systems in place.
Yeah.
Both formal and informal.
Totally.
Whistleblowers need to know that they're not alone,
Yeah.
that there are people and organizations that will stand with them, advocate for their protection and help them to kind of navigate these often very treacherous waters.
It's true. Can you imagine having to face those challenges completely alone?
I can't.
It's a scary thought.
It's terrifying.
It's like being sent into battle with like no armor and no weapons.
Yeah.
You
need support.
you need resources.
Yeah.
You need people on your side.
You need allies.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, given all of that, what are your thoughts on the anonymity piece of this?
I think it's really complicated
Yeah.
because on the one hand, you could say that anonymity, it could encourage more people to come forward because
Yeah.
they don't have to worry about being identified.
Right. But then, like, how do you investigate?
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
How do you really determine the validity of the claims
Right.
if you don't know who's making them?
Yeah. And there's that whole, like, is this a legitimate concern
Yeah.
or is this a personal vendetta?
Exactly. And, there's also the argument to be made that,
Mhm.
an anonymous report, it doesn't carry the same weight.
Doesn't have the same
Yeah.
oomph behind it.
Yeah. It's like when you put your name on something,
Yeah.
you're kind of vouching for it with your own reputation.
Exactly. So there's a lot to unpack there.
There is.
And I don't think there are easy answers.
No.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this world of whistleblowing,
Yeah.
what's that one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Imagine a world
Okay.
where speaking truth to power
Mm-hmm.
isn't an act of defiance,
Yeah.
but it's an expectation.
Ooh, I like that.
It's a norm.
Yeah.
It's woven into the fabric of society.
Yeah.
A world where transparency and accountability aren't just aspirational goals, but they're lived realities. What role will you play in creating that world?
Wow, that's a really powerful question.
It is.
And one that I hope our listeners will, kind of sit with and ponder
Me too.
for a while.
Because it's, ultimately the fight for a more just and ethical world. It begins with each of us.
Well said. Well, it's been a privilege to kind of go on this journey with you and explore this really important topic.
Likewise.
And to our listeners, thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep speaking truth to power